The rain started as a quiet whisper against the car window. Keanu Reeves watched the clouds thicken above the narrow mountain road as the vehicle climbed through the mist. Beside him, Sandra Bullock scrolled through her phone, smiling at a message from the film crew waiting on the other side of the valley. They were heading to a remote charity shoot meant to raise funds for rebuilding a school destroyed by floods. It was supposed to be a simple drive, but the storm that day had other plans. The first clap of thunder made Sandra look up sharply. The driver turned on the headlights, but the heavy fog swallowed the beam. Rain poured harder, turning the smooth road into a slick surface that gleamed like glass. The trees swayed violently, and the car wipers moved as fast as they could. Sandra tightened her seatbelt and glanced at Keanu. He gave her a calm smile, the same kind that had always made people feel safe around him. "We'll reach soon," he said quietly, but there was a hint of worry in his tone. Minutes later, the car jolted. The driver cursed under his breath. A fallen branch blocked the road. He slowed down, but the tires slipped on wet mud. Before anyone could react, the car skidded to the side, hit a rock, and came to a shuddering stop near the edge of the forest. The sound of rain against metal filled the air. "Is everyone all right?" Keanu asked, opening his door. Cold rain instantly soaked his clothes, but he didn't care. He checked the driver first, then Sandra. Both were safe, but shaken. The road ahead was invisible now, covered by a curtain of rain. The driver tried to restart the car, but the engine coughed weakly and died. Sandra stepped out, holding her jacket over her head. Her shoes sank into mud. "We can't stay here," she said. "This storm is only getting worse." Keanu looked around, scanning the forest. "I saw a ranger sign a few miles back. There might be a shelter nearby." The driver hesitated. "Sir, the roads are gone. It's safer to stay until help comes." But Keanu noticed the slope behind them beginning to flood. Water rushed down in streams, carrying leaves and branches. Staying would mean danger. He made the decision. "We walk," he said. "Grab what you can carry." They packed a few supplies into a small bag, wrapped a plastic sheet over their heads, and started walking into the forest. Sandra tried to keep her phone dry, but it showed no signal. Every few steps, lightning flashed, illuminating the trees like skeletons in the dark. The deeper they went, the louder the rain became. The ground was uneven, covered in roots and puddles. Sandra slipped once, and Keanu caught her arm before she fell. He didn't say anything, just gave her a reassuring nod. She could barely see his face through the rain, but she felt his quiet confidence guiding her forward. After nearly an hour of walking, they found a narrow trail. There was an old wooden board half broken with faded paint that looked like it once said Ranger Post. Hope flickered inside them. They followed the trail, but the path turned steeper and the storm grew wilder. The wind howled through the trees, carrying strange sounds that made Sandra stop more than once. "Did you hear that?" she whispered. It sounded like footsteps. Keanu listened for a moment but shook his head. "Just the wind," he said, though even he wasn't sure. The storm felt alive. It twisted around them, testing their courage. Every flash of lightning showed the shadow of tall trees bending under the weight of the rain. Their clothes were soaked and Sandra's hands were trembling. "How far do you think it is?" she asked, her voice shaking. "Not far," Keanu replied softly, though the uncertainty in his eyes said otherwise. "We'll find it." Suddenly, thunder cracked right above them. A branch broke and fell near their feet, splashing mud all over. Sandra screamed, but Keanu pulled her close, covering her with his arms until it passed. For a few seconds, they just stood there, hearts pounding. "You okay?" he asked. She nodded weakly. "I think so." They continued walking until the forest opened into a small clearing. In the distance, they saw a dark shape, a wooden hut standing crookedly among the trees. It looked abandoned, but it was shelter. They hurried toward it. As they reached the door, it creaked open on its own, pushed by the wind. Inside, everything was covered in dust and cobwebs. There was an old lantern on a table, a few broken chairs, and a stone fireplace that hadn't been used in years. The smell of damp wood filled the air. Sandra collapsed onto the floor, exhausted. Keanu closed the door and checked the corners to make sure it was safe. He found a few pieces of dry wood under the table, probably left by someone long ago. He smiled faintly. "We might just get lucky tonight," he said. She looked up at him, her face pale but hopeful. "Can you make fire?" "I can try," he said, striking a match. But the first one went out. So did the second. The air was too wet. He searched the shelves and found an old bottle with traces of lantern fuel. He poured a few drops over the wood and tried again. This time, the flame flickered, weak but alive. The small fire filled the room with a faint orange glow. Sandra held her hands near it, feeling warmth return to her fingers. Keanu sat beside her, quiet and thoughtful. The storm outside was relentless, hammering against the roof, but for a moment, they felt a sense of peace. "You always stay calm," she said after a while. "How do you do that?" Keanu smiled. "You just breathe. Panic makes storms worse, but if you trust the moment, it'll pass." She nodded, thinking about his words. There was something about his calmness that made her believe they would be all right. But just as she began to relax, another sound echoed from outside. Not thunder, not rain. Something else. A faint crunch, like footsteps in wet soil. Both of them froze. "Did you hear that?" Sandra whispered again. Keanu stood up slowly and looked toward the window. Lightning flashed, showing only trees. But the sound came again, closer this time. He turned back to her. "Stay near the fire," he said softly. The wind roared again, and for a moment everything went silent except the steady rhythm of rain. Sandra stared at the door, her heart racing. "What if someone's out there?" Keanu didn't answer. His eyes stayed fixed on the shadows outside, and then the lantern flickered. The light dimmed. The storm raged harder, and in that eerie half-darkness, the night began to test, not just their courage but their trust in each other. The storm outside had only begun, but neither of them knew the true storm was yet to come. The hut creaked with every gust of wind. The fire flickered, throwing long shadows on the walls. Sandra sat close to it, her knees drawn to her chest, trying to stop her hands from trembling. Keanu moved quietly, checking every corner of the small room. The sound of rain against the roof was deafening now, but under it, there was something else, something softer, almost human. "It's probably an animal," Sandra whispered, her voice barely audible. "Maybe," Keanu replied, but his eyes stayed fixed on the window. He moved closer, peering through the broken glass. Outside, the rain blurred everything, turning the forest into a dark, moving sea. Nothing looked solid. Nothing felt safe. A sudden flash of lightning revealed something in the distance, a shape, tall and still. Keanu blinked, but when the light faded, it was gone. He turned back to Sandra. "We're not going anywhere tonight," he said. "The road's gone, and it's too dangerous to move in this rain. We wait until morning." She nodded, though fear lingered in her eyes. "What if the roof collapses?" "It won't," he said gently. "The walls are strong. We'll be fine." He sat beside her again, feeding the fire with more wood. The warm light softened their faces, but the silence between them grew heavy. After a few minutes, Sandra spoke again. "I keep thinking about the people waiting for us. They must be worried. They'll send someone to look," Keanu said calmly. "We just have to hold on till then," she smiled faintly. "You always make it sound so simple." "Simple doesn't mean easy," he replied. "But fear only grows if we feed it." The rain hammered harder. Suddenly, a loud bang shook the door. Sandra gasped and jumped to her feet. Keanu grabbed a wooden stick and moved toward the sound. He pushed the door open slightly, letting the wind blow in. Rain sprayed across his face, cold and sharp. He looked outside but saw nothing, only the storm. He closed the door again and bolted it. "Must have been the wind," he said, though he wasn't sure anymore. Sandra's voice shook. "What if someone's out there? Maybe they need help." Keanu looked at her with quiet seriousness. "If someone's there, they'll come back when it's safe. Right now, stepping outside could get us both lost." She nodded reluctantly. He could tell she wanted to believe him, but her mind was racing. Time passed slowly. The clock on the wall had stopped long ago, and the only rhythm left was the storm. Sandra's clothes were still damp, so Keanu found an old blanket from a broken shelf and handed it to her. "Thank you," she whispered, wrapping it around herself. He smiled. "Try to rest." She hesitated. "What about you?" "I'll keep watch for a while." The firelight reflected softly in his eyes. Sandra lay down on the wooden floor near the fire, her breathing uneven at first. Outside, thunder rolled again. Keanu sat near the door, staring into the dark, his mind somewhere far away. He remembered another storm, many years ago. He had been trapped on a mountain road during a snowstorm while filming. A stranger had saved him that night, guiding him to safety. That memory shaped him. It taught him that courage isn't about strength. It's about calmness when others lose hope. As he sat there, the hut groaned again. Something thudded softly against the side. Keanu's muscles tensed. He picked up the lantern and walked toward the sound. Sandra stirred but didn't wake. He stepped outside for a moment, shielding the flame from rain. What he saw made his heart tighten. A small, injured dog lay near the door, shivering, covered in mud. Its leg was bleeding slightly. Keanu bent down, picked it up carefully, and brought it inside. When Sandra opened her eyes, she gasped. "Oh no, is it hurt?" "Just a small cut," he said softly, wrapping the dog in a towel. It must have followed the light. Sandra helped him clean it with a small bottle of water. The dog whimpered, but soon calmed down between them. "You even help animals in storms?" she said with a small smile. Keanu shrugged. Kindness is never wasted. Even small lives matter. The warmth of their small fire seemed to grow after that. The dog curled beside Sandra, resting its head on her arm. The fear in the air began to fade. But just as things seemed calm again, a faint sound broke the peace. 3 short knocks on the window. Sandra froze. "Please tell me that's the wind again." Keanu turned toward the sound slowly. The glass shook once more. He picked up the lantern and stepped closer. Lightning flashed, illuminating a face outside. Pale, drenched, eyes wide with fear. Sandra gasped. "Someone's out there!" Keanu opened the door quickly. A man stumbled inside, soaked to the bone, shivering uncontrollably. His face was scratched and his clothes were torn. "Thank you," the man whispered weakly. "I thought I wouldn't make it." Sandra rushed to help him sit. "You're safe now. Come near the fire." The man nodded and sat down, breathing heavily. I was hiking when the storm hit. My tent flew away. I saw your light." Keanu gave him water and a dry cloth. "You're lucky you found us," he said calmly. The man looked around nervously. "The roads are all flooded. I tried to walk back, but I lost the path. Something kept following me. I swear I heard footsteps." Sandra looked at Keanu in shock. "I told you I heard something earlier." Keanu said nothing. He simply looked toward the window again, his jaw tight. The man continued, his voice trembling. "It felt like someone was watching me all the way here." Outside, the storm screamed louder than before. The fire crackled softly, the only comfort inside that small hut. 3 strangers now sat together, drawn by chance and fear. But as lightning flashed once more, Keanu noticed something strange. The man's shoes were clean, not muddy at all, and his watch was dry. Keanu's instincts stirred. He didn't show it, but his mind sharpened. Something about this visitor wasn't right. Still, he stayed calm. "He didn't want to scare Sandra. You should rest," Keanu said softly. "You've had a long night." The man nodded slowly, curling up near the door. His eyes closed, but his breathing was too steady, too controlled for someone exhausted. Keanu sat down near Sandra again. She whispered, "You think he's okay?" "Maybe," he replied, watching the man's every movement. The firelight flickered again. Outside, the thunder faded for a moment, replaced by silence. A silence so deep it felt wrong. Keanu leaned closer to Sandra. "If anything happens," he said softly, "stay behind me." "You think he's dangerous?" she whispered. "I don't know yet," Keanu said. "But storms don't always come from the sky." The fire cracked, breaking the silence. The rain started again, heavier than before. Somewhere deep inside the forest, a faint echo of a howl rose through the wind. Keanu didn't sleep that night. He just sat there, listening, waiting, protecting. The next morning, the storm would reveal truths none of them were ready for. Morning came without sunlight. The forest outside was still wrapped in fog, and the rain had slowed to a steady whisper. The small hut smelled of damp wood and smoke. Keanu sat near the dying fire, his eyes fixed on the stranger who had appeared in the night. The man was awake, staring quietly at the floor. He had barely moved since dawn. Sandra gave him a cup of warm water, her kindness natural even after everything they'd faced. "Thank you," the man said, his voice rough. "I don't know what would have happened if I hadn't found this place." "You're safe now," Sandra said gently. "What's your name?" The man hesitated. "Michael," he said after a pause. "Just Michael." Keanu nodded slightly, but something about the answer didn't sit right with him. People who told the truth rarely paused before their own name. Still, he didn't press. Instead, he spoke calmly. "Once the rain stops, we'll find a way back to the main road. There should be a rescue team by now." Michael nodded slowly, glancing at the door. "Yeah, maybe." His eyes darted around the room as if measuring it. The quiet stretched long enough for Sandra to feel uneasy. She looked at Keanu, and he gave her a small, reassuring look. Keanu's calm was steady, but inside, his instincts were sharp. He noticed Michael's hands. No scratches, no signs of struggle, even though he claimed to have wandered through the storm. His backpack was nearly dry, and his shoes were clean despite the mud outside. Sandra didn't notice those things. She was still too focused on the warmth of the fire and the hope of getting out soon. "We can share some food," she said kindly, pulling out a small energy bar from her bag. "We have a little left." Michael smiled faintly. "You're kind," he said. "Most people wouldn't share anything in a storm like this." "Kindness doesn't need weather," she replied with a gentle smile. He looked at her a little too long. Keanu noticed it and shifted his seat slightly closer to her. The move was subtle but clear. The rain began again, soft but steady. Drops hit the roof like 1,000 tiny drums. The small dog they'd rescued the night before woke up and barked once toward the window. Its fur stood up slightly. Keanu looked over. "Animals always sense things before we do," he murmured. Michael laughed awkwardly. "Yeah, maybe it just hates storms." Keanu didn't respond. He stood up and went to check the door. Outside, the forest was silent. No wind, no movement. Too silent for a morning after such a strong storm. He stepped out for a moment, taking a deep breath of cold air. Puddles reflected the gray sky. The road they came from was gone, washed away by the rain. He saw broken branches, pieces of the car's trail, and far in the distance, a helicopter circling the valley. Help was near, but the terrain was still dangerous. When he stepped back inside, he found Michael standing, his back turned, looking through Keanu's bag. "What are you doing?" Keanu's voice was calm but firm. Michael froze. "Oh, I was just checking for more matches. Thought we'd need them?" "You could have asked," Keanu said quietly. His eyes locked on him. Michael smiled nervously. "Sorry, just trying to help." Sandra looked between them, feeling the tension rise. Keanu's calm expression didn't change, but his body shifted slightly, like a wall between Sandra and Michael. "Sit down," Keanu said gently. "Let's not waste energy arguing." Michael hesitated, then obeyed. The fire crackled softly between them, the warmth now feeling thin and uneasy. After a long silence, Sandra tried to break it. "How long have you been out here?" she asked. Michael rubbed his hands together. 3 days, he said. Was hiking alone. Lost my map. When the storm hit, I couldn't find my camp again. Keanu listened quietly. 3 days in this rain? Michael nodded. Yeah. And your shoes are still clean, Keanu said softly. The words hung heavy in the air. Sandra turned toward Keanu in surprise. What do you mean? Keanu's eyes didn't leave Michael's. I checked outside. No one could walk through that mud and stay that clean. Michael looked down at his shoes. Guess I stayed on rocks, he said quickly, forcing a laugh. But there were no rocks near the hut. Only wet soil. The silence grew again. The firelight flickered on their faces. The dog whined softly. Finally, Sandra whispered, Keanu, maybe he's just scared. Keanu nodded slowly. Maybe, but his instincts were loud now. He'd seen people lie before, on sets, in life, in the world. Truth always carried breath. Lies carried tension, and Michael's shoulders were too tight for someone grateful to be alive. Hours passed. The rain softened, turning into mist. Sandra dozed off against the wall, her head resting on the blanket. The dog curled near her. Keanu sat still, pretending to rest, but his eyes stayed half open, watching. Michael moved slowly, pretending to adjust his seat, but his hand slipped toward his jacket pocket. Keanu saw a metallic glint. He spoke without raising his voice. What's in your pocket? Michael froze. Just a lighter. Show me, Keanu said. Michael hesitated, then pulled out a small object, a steel folding knife. Sandra woke up instantly at the sound of Keanu's tone. What's happening? Keanu didn't look away. He brought a knife. Michael raised his hands. Hey, it's just for protection. I wasn't gonna use it. Against what? Keanu asked quietly. You said you were alone. Michael's mouth opened, but no words came out. The storm outside had gone silent now. Even the rain had stopped. The world waited for what would happen next. Keanu's voice stayed steady. Sit down and put it away. The man hesitated, but the calm in Keanu's eyes was too strong. He finally sat down and placed the knife on the floor. Sandra whispered, Keanu, what if he... It's okay, Keanu said softly, as long as we stay calm. They sat in tense silence for several minutes until the distant sound of a helicopter echoed again. Sandra looked up, hope lighting her face. They're close, she said. Keanu nodded but didn't relax. The helicopter passed overhead. Someone would find them soon, but for now, they were still trapped together in that hut, 3 people with very different truths. Michael spoke suddenly, his tone low. You don't understand. I wasn't lost. Keanu looked at him. What do you mean? I was sent, he said quietly. There's a landslide warning. I came to find anyone trapped on this route. Sandra's eyes widened. You work with the rescue team? He nodded. I do. But my radio died when the lightning hit. I was walking toward the highway when I saw your light. Keanu's guard softened slightly. Why didn't you say that before? Michael sighed. Because people panic when they hear danger. I didn't want to make things worse. The tension in the room eased slowly. Keanu looked at him carefully, trying to read the truth in his face. This time, the man looked sincere. There's a helicopter searching this valley, Michael continued. They'll be here soon. But we need to get to higher ground before the next wave of rain hits. This hut is in the flood zone. Keanu nodded. Then we move. Sandra stood up, her heart racing. She looked out the window. The fog was thinning, and the first streaks of sunlight began to pierce through. For the first time in hours, hope returned. But as they packed their things, Michael said something that made both of them pause. You two are lucky, he said softly. If I hadn't seen your light, you wouldn't have lasted another hour. Keanu stopped. You saw our light? Michael nodded. A strong firelight through the trees. It stood out against the storm. Sandra turned to Keanu in surprise. But the fire didn't start until after you soaked your shirt and burned it. Keanu looked back at her slowly. Realization dawned between them. His small act of sacrifice, the moment he burned his only dry clothing to create a spark, had been the very thing that guided help to them. And now, that same flame was about to lead them home. The fog clung to the trees like a living curtain as they stepped out of the old hut. The rain had stopped, but the ground was thick with mud, and each step made a soft sucking sound beneath their boots. Keanu walked ahead, testing every path before Sandra followed. Michael trailed slightly behind, his eyes scanning the terrain with the practiced alertness of a rescue worker. Sandra pulled the blanket tighter around her shoulders. The cold bit through her damp clothes, and each breath came out as a pale mist in the air. "How far do we need to go?" she asked, her voice small but steady. Michael pointed toward the slope that disappeared into the fog. "Half a mile up that ridge. There's an old watchtower. If we can reach it, the rescue team will see us when the helicopter comes back around." Keanu nodded. "Then that's where we go." The forest felt different in daylight, softer yet strange. Broken branches hung like warnings from above, and pools of muddy water reflected the dull sky. Birds were silent. Even the wind seemed to hold its breath. For a while, they walked in silence. Keanu's calm presence anchored them. He carried most of the supplies, offering his hand whenever Sandra slipped. She tried to smile each time he helped her, but fatigue had settled deep into her bones. "You always stay so calm," she said quietly as they climbed. "Even now," Keanu smiled faintly. "Panic never solved a storm," he said. "When you stop fighting it, you can hear what it's trying to teach you." She thought about that for a moment. "What is this storm teaching us?" He looked at her gently. That even light needs darkness to be seen, she didn't answer. But his words stayed in her heart. Behind them, Michael called out, "Careful there!" The trail gets narrow. They reached a steep slope, where water still trickled down like thin silver threads. Keanu climbed first, planting his feet carefully before helping Sandra up. Her shoes slipped once, and she grabbed his arm. His grip was steady, unshakable. "I've got you," he said softly. She looked at him for a brief second, realizing how much those 3 words meant in that moment, not just for safety, but for trust. As they climbed higher, the air grew colder. Fog swirled around them, hiding everything beyond a few feet. The sound of distant thunder rolled again, warning them that the calm wouldn't last long. Michael moved ahead to scout the path. His silhouette vanished in the mist for a moment, then reappeared. "This way," he called out. "Almost there?" Keanu helped Sandra over a fallen log and checked his watch. They had been walking for nearly an hour. His body ached from exhaustion, but he ignored it. His focus stayed on keeping Sandra safe. The forest opened slightly, revealing a narrow clearing. At the far end stood the watchtower, old, rusted, leaning slightly to one side, but still standing tall against the gray sky. It looked like hope made of metal and memory. "We made it," Sandra breathed out, relief flooding her voice. But Michael's face was tense. "We're not safe yet," he said. "The lower valley's going to flood again once the rain returns. We need to climb the tower before that happens." Keanu nodded and helped Sandra toward the base. The ladder was covered in rust, but it held when he tested it. "You go first," he told her. "I'll follow." She hesitated, looking up at the dizzying height. "What if it breaks?" He smiled gently. "Then I'll catch you." She took a deep breath and began to climb. The metal was cold and slick, but she focused on his steady voice below. "One step at a time," he said. "You're doing fine." By the time they reached the top, the view was breathtaking. The valley stretched below like a painting washed in silver mist. Patches of sunlight broke through the clouds, lighting the world in soft gold. For the first time since the storm began, Sandra felt the warmth of hope. Michael climbed up behind them, carrying the radio he had kept in his bag. He tried turning it on, but it only crackled with static. "The signal's weak," he muttered. "Maybe if the clouds clear—" Suddenly, the metal beneath them shuddered. The tower groaned under a gust of wind. Sandra gasped and grabbed the railing. Keanu steadied her instantly. "It's all right," he said firmly. "It's strong enough." Below them, dark clouds gathered again. The rain had found its way back. Michael tried the radio again. "Mayday, this is Unit 7. 3 survivors on the northern ridge tower. Repeat, 3 survivors, nothing but static." Then, faintly, a voice answered through the noise. "Copy that. Stay put. Storm. Clearing. Hold position." They all froze, listening to the broken words. It was hope, distant, fragile, but real. Keanu smiled faintly. They know we're here. Sandra felt tears in her eyes. We're really going to make it. But Michael's expression changed. His eyes darted toward the forest below. We have to move soon. That wasn't just one storm cell. Another wave is coming, and it's bigger. Keanu looked down the valley. Through the mist, he saw the faint glimmer of water rising again, faster than before. If that flood reaches the base of the tower, it could collapse, Michael warned. Keanu thought quickly. We can't go down yet. The water's already rising. Then we wait, Sandra said softly. We've come this far together. They huddled near the top platform, the wind whipping around them. Sandra shivered, and Keanu wrapped his jacket over her shoulders. She looked at him, her eyes filled with quiet gratitude. You shouldn't, she said. You're cold too, he smiled. You need it more. She wanted to say thank you, but her voice caught. The world below was disappearing beneath waves of gray water. Suddenly, the tower shook again. A bolt of lightning struck nearby, lighting up the entire sky. The metal rattled violently. Sandra screamed and held on to Keanu. His arms wrapped around her, firm and protective. Michael gripped the railing, shouting over the wind. The foundation won't hold if it hits again. Keanu's mind raced. He looked down and saw debris floating toward them. Broken branches, logs, and pieces of the old forest hut being swallowed by the flood. The tower tilted slightly, groaning under pressure. One of the support beams cracked with a sharp sound. We have to get down now, Michael shouted, but there was no safe ground left to stand on. The flood had reached the base. Climbing down meant drowning. Staying meant falling. Sandra's voice trembled. Keanu, what do we do? He looked at her with steady eyes, even as rain pelted his face. Trust me, he said softly. Whatever happens, trust me. She nodded, tears mixing with the rain. Keanu pulled a rope from his bag, a leftover from the crew's equipment. He tied it around the tower's central beam and secured the other end around Sandra's waist. If the tower falls, this might hold you long enough, he said quietly. What about you? She asked, her voice breaking. I'll be fine, he said. Just don't let go. The wind roared again, and with a sound like thunder splitting the earth, one of the tower's lower supports gave way. The entire structure tilted forward. Hold on! Michael shouted. In that chaos of wind, water, and lightning, Keanu did something that no one expected. He positioned himself behind Sandra, shielding her completely as the platform shook violently beneath them. The tower lurched again, and a section of railing broke away, falling into the flood below. Keanu tightened his grip around her, anchoring her with his strength. Keep your eyes closed, he said calmly. You're safe. She clung to him, heart pounding. For a few terrifying seconds, the world was nothing but noise and motion. And then, miraculously, the tower stopped tilting. It creaked, but it held. Michael, pale and breathless, looked over the edge. The water's slowing, he said. The current's changing direction. It's draining toward the lower valley. Keanu exhaled slowly, still holding Sandra close. His arms trembled from exhaustion, but he didn't let go. She whispered, her voice shaking. You could have fallen. He smiled faintly. So could you. That's why I stayed. They stood there for what felt like hours, the storm finally beginning to fade. Patches of sunlight broke through, turning the sky into a canvas of gold and silver. Below them, the valley shimmered with light. And from far away, the sound of a helicopter grew louder. Help was coming. But for Sandra, help had already been there all along, standing beside her, shielding her, proving that sometimes the greatest strength is the quiet courage to protect without promise. As the helicopter descended, Keanu looked at her one last time before turning toward the signal flare. His voice was soft, but full of meaning. The storm's over, he said. You're safe now. She smiled through tears, whispering, because you made it feel safe. The helicopter's blades sliced through the air, scattering mist across the flooded valley. Sandra watched it descend, the sound filling her with relief she hadn't felt in days. Keanu steadied her as the ladder dropped from the side. Michael waved a flare, signaling their position. When the rescue crew finally reached them, Sandra's legs almost gave way. One of the medics caught her arm, helping her climb aboard. Keanu followed behind, soaked, exhausted, but calm as always. He made sure everyone was inside before taking the last step himself. The helicopter lifted slowly, leaving the broken tower and the drowned valley below. Sandra looked out the window. The forest that had once felt like a trap now looked peaceful under the soft sunlight. It was as if the storm had washed away every fear. The medic wrapped a blanket around her shoulders. "You're lucky," he said kindly. "The lower ridge collapsed 20 minutes after your call." She turned to Keanu, realizing what that meant. If he hadn't acted when he did, if he hadn't tied that rope or shielded her from the fall, they wouldn't have survived. Her throat tightened. Keanu noticed her looking and smiled faintly. "See? The storm passed," he said quietly. She smiled back through tears. "Because you made it pass." Michael, sitting across from them, spoke up. "Your fire saved you. That light guided me, and it guided the helicopter too. Without it, we would have never found you." Sandra turned to Keanu again. She remembered the moment he burned his only dry shirt just to make that fire. What he did out of kindness became the beacon that saved all of them. For a moment, she couldn't speak. The world outside shimmered, golden rays cutting through clouds, touching the flooded trees. It looked like hope itself. Keanu closed his eyes, resting at last. His hands were still marked from the burns, but he didn't seem to care. Sandra watched him, her heart full. "You didn't just save my life," she whispered softly. "You saved my faith." The helicopter flew toward the horizon, leaving the valley behind. The rain had stopped, but in Sandra's heart, something new had begun. A quiet understanding that sometimes safety doesn't come from strong walls or bright lights. It comes from the calm courage of someone who refuses to let go, even when the storm is at its worst. A week later, sunlight streamed through the hospital window where Sandra sat quietly. Her arm was still bandaged from the cuts she got during the climb, but her heart was full of calm. She had replayed every moment of that storm in her mind, every step, every sound, every look. It all felt like a dream, except for one truth that never faded: Keanu's courage. The door opened softly. Keanu walked in, his hand still wrapped with white cloth from the burns he got while lighting that first fire. He carried a small box in his hand and gave her a gentle smile. "You're supposed to rest," she said softly. "So are you," he replied with that same calm tone. "But you don't look like you're listening to your doctor either." She laughed faintly. "I keep thinking about the fire, how something so small saved us." He nodded. It wasn't the fire. It was hope. The flame just made it easier to see. She looked down at the box he placed on her bedside table. "What's that?" "Something the rescue team found," he said. She opened it slowly. Inside lay a small piece of burnt fabric, the remains of the shirt he had sacrificed to start the fire. She touched it gently, her eyes filling with tears. "You kept it?" she asked. "The pilot said it helped them spot the hut through the storm," Keanu said quietly. "Thought you might want to remember that light." She smiled through her tears. "I'll never forget it." He looked out the window, watching the sky. "You know, storms don't always come to destroy. Sometimes they arrive to clear the way for something new." Sandra nodded, feeling the truth in his words. "What did this one clear for you?" He paused for a moment before answering. "It reminded me why kindness matters, even when no one sees it. Sometimes, the quietest acts echo the loudest." She smiled softly. "Then maybe the world needs more people like you." He shook his head. "The world just needs more people who believe light can still be found in the dark." A gentle silence filled the room. Outside, the sun slipped through the clouds, bright and golden, like the memory of that fire that refused to die. Weeks later, a foundation was announced in their names, the Light Beyond the Storm, a small rescue fund that built safe shelters in disaster zones. It wasn't about fame or heroism. It was about gratitude. It was about remembering how one act of compassion can save many lives. When the first shelter opened, Sandra and Keanu stood together under the clear sky. The children there lit a small clay lamp to mark the beginning. Sandra watched the glow and whispered, "That's the same light, isn't it?" Keanu smiled. "Yes, the same one that kept us alive." She looked at him, eyes soft. "You didn't just make me feel safe that night, Keanu. You made the world safer, too." The wind blew gently across the valley, carrying the faint scent of rain. Far in the distance, clouds gathered again, but this time, they didn't bring fear. They brought renewal. As the lamps flickered in the evening air, Sandra realized something she'd never forget. Storms don't always take away light. Sometimes they reveal who carries it inside.